The very first thing I'm going to ask of everyone in the room, please, we are going to be doing a live video conference with Washington, D.C. very shortly with Commissioner Clyburn. I would ask everyone, please turn your phone completely off. Not vibrate, not silent, but off all the way. I know it might be tough for some to hang on to this without that phone vibrating or whatever. Please, it could interfere, and it probably will interfere with our connection with DC, so please just turn it completely off. In fact, I had to tell myself that, and my phone is now officially turned off, so please do that first. All day, imagine what that would be like, all day, leave it off. What a nice day that would be. Thank you for doing that, I appreciate it. And good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome. Welcome. My name is Steve Katka, and I am the General Manager at Albany Mutual Telephone Association. And I'm also currently serving as the Vice Chairman of the Minnesota Telecom Alliance Board of Directors. It is my pleasure this morning to act as the MC for our keynote presentation. Before we get started, however, we have two video welcomes. One from Senator Amy Klobuchar, and the second from Senator Al Franken. So let's go ahead and roll the tape.
Hello to all my friends with the Minnesota Telecom Alliance. I think you know I would much rather be there with you in person, but there's just a few things going on right now, and I'm honored to join you via video. I want to begin by thanking you for everything you're doing to connect our communities in Minnesota, particularly our rural communities. Whether it's high-speed internet or wireless or video, the tools and services you provide are vital for ensuring the strength and vitality of rural America. I'm especially interested in your work to expand broadband, a great equalizing force for boosting rural economies and leveling the playing field. In an economy that is increasingly reliant on technology, you don't need to live off a major highway or in a bustling city center to find a good job, start a business, or get a quality education. But you do need a high-speed internet connection. That's why I feel so strongly about this subject. I truly believe that expanding broadband is the infrastructure challenge of our generation. Just as we worked to bring electricity and telephone service to every home in America during the 1930s, we need to be working to bring high-speed internet to every home today. Bringing broadband to rural communities has been a priority to me since my first days in the Senate. Last year, I introduced legislation making it easier for us to actually construct the broadband infrastructure, requiring states to install conduit as part of any federally funded transportation project. In other words, to only dig once. I'm pleased to say the policy was enacted through an executive order by the President. And I've been closely watching those efforts to reform the universal service funds and inter-carrier compensation. This is an issue that I know you're concerned about. And as a member of the Commerce Committee, I've had a chance to address it multiple times over the last year with the FCC. Not all telephone companies are alike. Additionally, I know many of your members have had issues with calls being completed to rural Minnesotans and businesses. That's an outrageous problem. I talked to the FCC, I pushed them, I sent letters, and recently we had a Commerce Committee hearing just this week. And I told them, finally, a consent agreement got into place with Level 3, one of the communications companies, and I hope we can go from there and get even more enforcement. But it's a very good, strong first sign. I will continue to urge the FCC to take this issue seriously and protect the right for all Minnesotans to have access to quality communication services. Finally, for those of you who provide wireless services, I want you to know that I'm working hard to give you a level playing field with the larger carriers by making sure consumers can unlock their phones and bring their devices to you when they switch networks. I've introduced a bill called the Wireless Consumer Choice Act, which would direct the FCC to take action and give consumers the consistency they need. There's a lot at stake here. I'll continue working with both the FCC and our small and rural telecoms to help keep infrastructure projects going and quality communication services strong in rural communities. We need to support and build on the progress we've made so far with broadband deployment. While we've come a long way in the last few years, we still have work to do in bringing broadband to rural America. But this is work worth doing. This is work worth doing, not just because it's good for rural economies, but because it's good for rural communities. I've always believed that a kid who grows up in rural America should be able to stay in rural America. They should be able to get an education, to find a job in rural communities, to raise a family. Broadband and quality communication services make that possible. You make that possible. Have a great time today. Thank you for having me.
Hi, I'm Al Franklin. I'm sorry I couldn't join you for your annual convention, but I want to thank the Minnesota Telecom Alliance for hosting this valuable convention. I'd especially like to thank MTA President Brent Christensen and NCTA President Shirley Bloomfield for their leadership. In a few minutes, you're going to hear from FCC Commissioner Clyburn, who I've had the pleasure of working with over the last few years. And I know you have a lot of other telecom experts on hand, but I want to take a minute to thank you for your hard work. Your alliance's nearly 100 small, medium, and large companies not only provide services in rural, hard-to-reach areas of the state, but also thousands of high-quality jobs. A study by the Hudson Institute found that rural telecommunications companies contributed $14.5 billion to state economies in 2009 and supported over 70,000 jobs. This is remarkable, and you should be proud of all that your companies are doing to fuel Minnesota's economy. But even with all of your hard work, there are still more than 226,000 people in Minnesota who do not have access to broadband. That's just unacceptable. We need to build additional infrastructure to bring broadband to unserved areas and to promote greater adoption in rates where broadband is already available. The internet is a necessity in today's world, and I strongly believe that everyone in greater Minnesota is entitled to the same quality internet service as people living in the Twin Cities. Expanding broadband access is one of my top priorities, and I hope you will work with me to help make it a reality. I always welcome your ideas and suggestions for how to bring universal broadband access to all Minnesotans. Thank you again for your great work, and enjoy the rest of your convention.
Well, we certainly appreciate each of our senators' efforts in assisting us with our issues and for taking the time to provide us with their videos, especially since they were both unable to attend today. Now, we are extremely fortunate to have with us this morning via video conference FCC Commissioner Clyburn. Originally, Commissioner Clyburn was going to join us here in person, but now we get the opportunity to practice what we preach. And she will be joining us live via broadband connection. Commissioner Clyburn has a long history of public service, having served for 11 years on the Public Service Commission of South Carolina before being sworn in as a member of the commission in 2009. In her time on the commission, she has been actively involved in the issues affecting our industry, including the Commission's efforts to increase commercial broadband service in 2011 and overhaul of the Universal Service Fund. Commissioner Clyburn's full biography is available on the MTA Convention app, so please be sure and check it out. Thank you, Commissioner Clyburn, for joining us this morning.
Thank you so very much.
Also joining us this morning is NCTA CEO Shirley Bloomfield. Shirley has more than 20 years of experience in telecom policy and has served as NCTA CEO since 2010. She's no stranger to the MTA, and we deeply appreciate her returning for her second MTA convention appearance in as many years. You can also find Shirley's biography on the MTA Convention app. Thank you, Shirley, for joining us today. So we're going to follow a little different format this year versus things that you may have seen in the past. Rather than having Commissioner Clyburn deliver a speech today, we're going to have a conversation with the Commissioner. Shirley has prepared some general questions for the Commissioner about her thoughts on issues facing our industry. As you can also see, our MTA President and CEO, Brent Christensen, has joined Shirley here on stage. And Brent will have a couple of Minnesota-specific questions for the Commissioner. Once they're done, we'll provide an opportunity for you to ask your questions. So it's time to get started, and we'll let Shirley take it from here.
Terrific. Thank you all, and thank you, Commissioner, for joining us this morning. It's unusual to see you not in your own office, so we'll get to use broadband here.
absolutely. I wish I could be with you. I look better in person. But I can't.
So
It's great. It's great to be with you, regardless of that.
terrific. Well, you know, I'd be remiss, given the fact that you are joining us remotely, to not ask you about, you know, right now Washington, D.C., it doesn't take much. You have to turn on the news to see that we've got a lot of issues on the federal spending side, and sequestration is now officially hit. So I'm always excited when I hit TSA to see what kind of lines we're going to have. Obviously, you know, it's affected the FCC, and we'd all be very interested, kind of, again, very timely in that, you know, your travel budgets are likely impacted. How are you seeing sequestration and some of the pressures we're seeing in Washington impacting what you're doing out at the FCC?
Well, part of it is due to this reflected in this engagement. And I apologize, if I start and stop people, I'm trying to recalibrate. So I'm joining you via webcast. Are you hearing that too?
Yeah.
So because of the restrictions that we have, but we're working very hard internally to cut non-essential services. I am not sure. I've lost you, I believe. And doing, however, to meet our public definition we have. We've got 1,700 persons who are working very hard to ensure that the work of the commission keeps moving. We've got 5 commissioners today that are working hard to keep things running. And I've got an incredible staff that keeps me up to speed and in sync. So the work of the commission, even though you might not see us as much as you would like, the work of the commission will and has, you know, it's continuing.
Perfect. So you raised it.
I'm not hearing you. Can you start again?
I stopped talking because aliens were coming in.
Oh, okay. So what we might end up doing is right. Okay, I was just told that you don't have a phone bridge. Okay, then you sound a little better now.
So I'll see if I can get a question in that I think everybody is dying to know the answer to. And you referenced the fact that right now there's 5 FCC commissioners, but last week was a really exciting week for the commission with the announcement of both the chairman and Commissioner McDowell intending to leave the commission soon. So just, I'm curious, you know, that will change a lot of dynamics, new faces, we'll have an acting chairman. I'm just curious kind of what you see, you know, how that's going to impact the work of the FCC.
Well, again, we have 1,700 individuals who will keep things moving. It's new for us, but it's nothing new for the commission. We've been down to 3 commissioners before, and we function beautifully. And again, it's always better to have a full complement of individuals. And I shouldn't say that we're down to 4, I think, under my since I've been here, and we function beautifully because of those 1,700 dedicated staffers. So again, the work will continue, and the American public will be served.
Great. So you've got a lot on your plate. There's a lot of things the FCC is looking at right now. You've got spectrum policy out there. We've got, you know, the whole effort on FirstNet and emergency communication. And obviously something that this group feels very passionately about, and that would be the implementation of universal service reform, call completion, IP transition. All of them are very critical to independent telecommunication carriers. How do you stay on top of all of those different priorities? And then I'd love to hear, actually kind of following on that, what do you see as priorities, or what are priorities for you?
Well, you basically just enumerated the priorities, to be honest with you. Thank you so very much. So this will be a short answer. Again, we keep on top of this because we have an incredible staff who is dedicated to the public interest. So you mentioned lifeline reform, which I think you did, universal service reform, which is critical. You know, lifeline reform, which is a very, very, very special and critical for me. The broadband pilot programs that are very important for us to glean information to better serve the American public, doing more with less. So all of these things are critically important, and for me also the Healthcare Connect program. So all of these things are important in terms of serving the public interest and ensuring that we're using these technology to provide enhanced and more robust service for the American public.
Great. So one of the things that, obviously is on both of our priority lists then is universal service. So recently the Commission came out with the 6th Order on Recon on universal service and intercarrier compensation and addressed some issues that rural telecommunication providers had expressed some concern with, including ensuring that there was more predictability in the model capping USF support for some of the companies. And in your statement, you had said that you believe the 6th Order will provide the predictability that these folks need. And one of the things that we find in this industry is predictability is so important because these are very highly capital intensive entities that are making really big financial decisions, which is very difficult to do when you don't know year to year what your business model is going to look at. We just saw yesterday, honestly, one of the first bankruptcies announced, and one of the things they cited in their filing up in New England was the lack of predictability on USF support. They obviously had bigger financial issues, but it certainly was one of the factors. So I'm really interested if you could elaborate a little bit on how you think some of the things in the 6th Order will help in terms of predictability.
Well, before I tackle that, I want to reinforce what is obvious to a lot of us. We're in a constant state of transition. The market in and of itself breeds, I hate to say it, but it breeds unpredictability. So we have to acknowledge that even before this pathway in terms of universal service reform, that there was unpredictability, uncertainty, and uneasiness in the market. And so I have to start from there. But as it relates to our engagement, as it relates to universal service reform, we have been, and thanks to you and your members, extremely engaged, extremely hands-on in terms of reforms that we all agreed had to happen. And so what we have been doing, I think, shows the dexterity and the flexibility of this agency. If you would note that the order provides allowing for those two categories of caps to be summed up for the remainder of the year. What does that mean? That means that fewer carriers will be impacted by the HCLF's regression. And so all of this this assistance and all that we will continue to do, I think will help us on this much needed transitional path. But change was going to come. There have been calls, as you know, to make adjustments because of the contribution factor. So we needed to be hands-on and not passive in this engagement. And so at the beginning and we need to acknowledge that there were a lot of pressures on all of us, and we needed to make some reforms and some movements. And I think in the long run, Shirley and others, that we will look upon this we won't laugh about it, but we will look upon it as a much needed pathway towards a better provisioning of service.
And I do want to thank you, Commissioner, and your staff, Angela, who have been always open door, always constructive working with us. And now that the 6th Order is out, we're ready for the 7th Order. So we'll continue coming back in to work with you. So we greatly appreciate your perspective on that and continue working on universal service because it is You know, again, you look at Secretary Vilsack over at USDA, who has a $5 billion loan portfolio from the sector of the industry on the infrastructure that folks use to build their networks. And, you know, watching him get engaged in this discussion, I think, has been really enlightening, given his concerns about the future repayment of the loans that he has outstanding.
Yes, and that's important. It's just a reminder that the things that we do here have ripple effects. There are no silos here. Increasingly, our worlds and our universes are converging, and so it is necessary for us, to continue to work together in order to provide most efficient services. And so he reemphasized that, of course, in his engagement. And again, as you put forth, and I'd like to really talk about what good has been happening in the past and now. Because of some of the adjustments and the clarifications that we made at the FCC, your members have been using monies that was traditionally allocated for voice only to enhance and modernize their own networks. That happened even prior to reform. So you've got a whole host of people in this nation who have broadband-enabled platforms because of that. That's a good story to tell. You should be proud of that. However, we all know that there are some efficiencies that needed to be realized. We are on the pathway of doing that. And in the long run, in terms of from a regulatory standpoint, from a business standpoint, with your members, and from a provisioning standpoint for the American consumers, in the long run, we will all be better off. One of the things that I was, it was non-negotiable for me, was to ensure that we have as smooth a pathway as possible towards, these reforms, meaning no flash cuts, no hands-off engagement. It was always going to be interactive and as smooth as possible, but we really had to live within our means, live within a budget, and to provide the most modern services to the American consumers in order for us to stay on the cutting edge of progress. It's important, no matter where you live, no matter where you work, in order to have these this framework, these technologies, the platforms needed in order for communities to be the best they could be. And that was only going to happen with bringing discipline and structure in a smooth pathway to this engagement. It was only going to happen that way optimally.
So that actually is a perfect segue, Commissioner, to the fact that there's a number of telcos here in Minnesota that have lost a lot on the safety net additive. As you talk about reform and efficiency, you're always going to have some of those carriers who just serve really hard to serve areas where it's extraordinarily high cost. And a lot of these folks lost some of that safety net additive support that they thought they were going to receive for plant investments that they had done in 2010, 2011. So I'm just curious, you talk about getting on a new path and the efficiency, and absolutely understand where you're coming from. Just curious if you at the FCC are taking a look at what you can do to ensure consistency and stability for some of these kinds of carriers in the future. How do you deal with some of these folks who've lost some of their safety net additive, and how do we deal with figuring out how carriers continue to be able to build and budget and build out to some of these extremely high cost areas?
Well, one of the things that I think is important is to recognize how things are in that trending. Of what I mean by that, people are cutting, upwards of 40% of individuals are cutting the cord. At this point in time, I'm a cord, as old as I am a cord cutter at this stage. And so people are choosing mobile over fixed, and they have certain demands on us, meaning they want things faster, and businesses want increased bandwidth. So it's a challenge, but it's also an opportunity all of us at the FCC to give further guidance to you, for you to transform those current investments into those trends to include more robust broadband infrastructure in order to serve the needs of the community. That's a win-win for all of us, and I think if we were to, again, a mutual continual engagement, see where these trends are taking us, and to be economically and regulatorily in sync with that, I think will provide us with the optimal long-term opportunities, both economic and from a community service perspective.
Good morning, Commissioner. My name is Brent Christensen with Minnesota Telecom Alliance, and I've got a couple of questions that are kind of Minnesota specific. And the first one deals with the aging demographics that we have in our rural areas in Minnesota and around the country. You know, this transformation order has got an effect on them because our members are being forced to raise their local rates, and that goes to people that just want to call locally. In my hometown, I can call 900 people locally, and I am paying the same rates, or will be paying the same local rates that someone up here in the Twin Cities pays that can call 2 million people. How would you address that and talk with them and tell them when they're saying that their local rates are going up, but their services are not because of the transformation order?
Well, that's a difficult question and crossroads for all of us. You know, all of us, especially when it comes to those who are most vulnerable, which has a tendency to be our aging population, and you know, the most economically vulnerable of those populations. But the fact is, the cost of provisioning a lot of services, while in some places are going down as you know, technology advances, in terms of our core infrastructure, it is not, in terms of the maintenance, especially when we talk about, you know, legacy infrastructure. So one of the steps I will affirm that we took was to ensure that the fund no longer subsidizes extremely low rates in certain areas. So we are phasing in rate increases as you know, in terms of our reform, including you know, those new some new fees that consumers may face. So though that is a part, I have to say, of the new reality. But at the same time, we are maintaining and providing protections. If you do not want, if you are a senior that wants voice only, the way the fund, the way the reforms are set up, you will receive and will continue to receive, and it's a must that you will receive, the opportunity to have a voice-only engagement. If you get funds from USF, you will provide voice-only service if that's what the consumer wants. But also, one of the reasons you might have heard about me being extremely vocal about the Lifeline program. That is a program that I think has served this nation well. We are working towards reforms. Whatever deficiencies it has, we are working towards taking care of that. But it's so important for that program to remain in place for those who have a legacy engagement, a landline engagement, and for those who increasingly have a mobile engagement. It's important for that program, that safety program, that safety net to stay in place in order to provide service. That plan, these meaning Lifeline and all of the other universal service reform mechanisms, they need and will continue to be reformed, but not harmed. And so all of these things, I think, are important for us to recognize that it is a benefit to all of us if this entire nation is connected, not just from a pure communications like we're experiencing now, because of a business engagement, but you have public safety reasons. You've got individuals who need to be connected to secure and maintain jobs. All of those things are important for a functional society. So it's important for us to look at the entire matrix and to address those needs through these various mechanisms.
Yes, ma'am, and part of that entire matrix, it's also about perceived value, and not necessarily people that qualify for low-income programs. Those people, I do agree with you, they're taken care of. I'm more concerned about the people on fixed incomes, the people, retired people that don't qualify for those programs, and the perceived value of just a telephone line to call 900 people locally. That I don't believe that has the same value as a service that you even call 2 million people. So I guess I'd be interested in your thoughts about the value of the calling scope as opposed to the perceived low prices that you were talking about.
I'm afraid I really only heard every other word, but what I thought I gleaned from what you were asking is those who did not qualify, what happens, what is their fate. And part of the, I think, I know our goal and our mission is to ensure that there is competition in this environment. Ensure, and if you have competition, you will hopefully provide the framework for a variety of service offerings. And so if you have different price points, I've been hearing on, National Public Radio and the like about, these phones that are just basic voice that would cost under, $10 a month for anybody. And so if you just need that basic voice interaction, here is a price point and a vehicle for you. So I think it's important, that we not only provide a framework for the appropriate regulatory principles, but hopefully that in all of this creative engagement that technology neutral commission will provide will encourage all sorts of players, all sorts of devices, and all sorts of service offerings that will allow for anyone, regardless of their economic means or constraints, to have an engagement, to have an option, to have a tool for communication. So that's important to me. And reform and all of the other encouragements that we are doing and are contemplating at the Commission should bring about more service offerings to address those who might not qualify for Lifeline. And if I didn't answer your question, I'm sorry. I just haven't.
That's okay, but you brought up an excellent point, and I
engagement we're having right now.
Yeah. How about now? I dare I say it?
I'm here
now. Okay.
I know.
You brought up an excellent point, and I guess I'd like to talk a little bit about that. And that is those services that you see on TV for unlimited calling and all that stuff for $19.99 a year and less than $10 a year. Those are Magic Jack and Vonages of the world, and those require a broadband connection. Yet, those of us who sell our one basic telephone service, standalone telephone service, aren't going to be allowed to sell it for that.
You're not going to be allowed to sell it?
Yeah,
those of you who provide basic telephone service will not be allowed.
We would not be allowed to sell it at those price points because of the transformation orders floors for R1. Does that make sense?
Well, okay, I think I've heard you say those of you you mentioned a couple of providers that are offering some different price points. I guess in sync with my last point,
right.
And that you would not be allowed to compete in that space. But again, I don't want you to sell yourself short if that was your point, and that there are a lot of people who are wedded and who prefer an engagement with those local providers who were there with them since day one. And so it is incumbent upon all of that, and especially all of us, and especially upon you, to make your case, to affirm why your service, why your offering is superior. And I think then and only then will your portfolio look the same way? I don't know. But again, there are always opportunities, and because you are so creative about, marketing and reaffirming your value, your consumer and community service, all of those things, I don't want you to sell short. Those are pluses, and those attract customers.
Let me shift gears for just a second. Yesterday, at our issues luncheon, we had the chair of the Minnesota Public Utilities Commission, Beth Hadiger, speak before our group. And it kind of just prompted some thoughts about the roles of states. And as a former state commissioner yourself, what do you see the roles for state commissions in a post-transformation order world?
Well, I think it will remain the same, really become more robust. Our states are our first lines of defense for individuals who need and expect service, quality service offerings, public safety engagement. They're not going to call me out Clyburn at the FCC if they don't have if they have a problem with service. They're going to go to their state utility commissions. They're going to go to their local consumer affairs offices and get a service there, rightfully so. But the states have and will continue to be a partner for us in terms of all of these reforms, IPP transition and the like. They're going to be there at the front lines with us. That is why we have maintained and will continue to strengthen the relationships with all of the joint boards and conferences. So all of those things should be our reaffirmations about how important the role of states, the importance of the roles of states, and how the FCC recognizes that and knows that this is a partnership, not a competition. And so I've got particular sensitivities. I spent 11 years at a state commission, so I fully disclose that. My bio reflects that. But the FCC does recognize that it has an interstate obligation, but the intrastate obligation is just as important.
Great. Minnesota has statutory authority to establish a state universal service fund for landline telephone service only. And they've never done that. And as things are transitioning in the current world of telecommunications, we're not sure it makes a lot of sense to establish a state USF for a service that's going away. Will there be any effect on Minnesota companies when phase 2 of CAF, of the Connect America Fund, is implemented if Minnesota does not have a state USF?
Yeah, it could, to be honest with you, but it's uncertain at this point until we see the results of those cost models. So, I think from my perspective, the biggest impact would be whether the price cap carriers serving your state, choose to accept the federal funds to build. Now, if they don't, then we will go to a reverse auction mechanism, which could present some opportunities some unique opportunities for companies in your association. But if the state, of course, were to help fund broadband, it may entice those price cap carriers to build. So again, all of it depends. My state went to establish a fund early on, and we did not regret it, but I understand that we're at a different place in time, and so again, it could, but again, we have to wait to see what the results of the cost model are.
Kind of as a follow-up to that, one of the issues we've had with trying to establish a state USF is getting all the providers to pay into it, and particularly broadband providers that are not regulated by the state, cellular carriers, and things that are regulated by your commission. Is there anything the FCC could do, or would do, or is thinking of doing to address those issues at the state level?
I am not aware at this juncture that the Commission has any tools at its disposal to assist with that. It's been my experience that this is a state issue, And if you were to continue to speak with some of your colleagues, they have taken taken and have adopted various approaches in this regard. So that state-to-state engagement through neighborhood or other alliances or associations, I think would be your best inroad step towards that challenge.
Good, thank you.
So, Commissioner, kind of taking on the theme, going back to broadband adoption, you've already noted how important broadband obviously is in a lot of these communities. Several of NCTA's members were selected to participate in the Commission's Broadband Adoption Lifeline pilot project that you all rolled out recently, and they're going to launch their pilot projects this spring. So I'd be really interested in hearing your perspective about why the Commission is supporting this, putting out these pilot projects, and what you frankly hope to learn from them.
Well, one of the things that I love about pilots is it allows us just to do just what you mentioned, learn from it. So in order to increase broadband penetration for low-income consumers particularly, and I don't think any of us would say that that is not an important and worthy goal, we need to determine with, again, a finite amount of resources, how we best do this. And so what are the most efficient and effective means of doing this? And that is why the pilot programs, those programs are so important. Those variety of programs taking different types of approaches to this. And so we hope to learn and fashion any type of robust, widespread program that will address these critical needs of these critical citizens. We will use that information and roll out a program. So the data is critical for us to gather from what we learn from those programs in order to do and provision and to roll out the most efficient and effective means of bridging these digital divides. I don't have to affirm to you how important that is for all of our communities, how important it is for your bottom lines, as you continue to recalibrate and redistinguish yourself or your consumers. So this is a win-win scenario, and this is why it's so important for us to get it as close to right as possible, and these pilot programs will allow for that.
Commissioner, call completely, and I hate to say these words in this room because I'm in a room with about 400 of my closest friends, and their blood pressure is about to go through the roof when I say these two words together. But call completion is a problem here. And it doesn't matter if you're a customer service rep taking the call or a technician or the general manager, it is affecting all levels of our companies. And I know the SEC has taken up this issue and established a website for complaints and initiating proceedings to explore new rules. Can you give us a little bit of an update beyond the level 3 action and tell us what the next step is and how they're working from your perspective?
You probably have heard in the last couple of weeks that we have taken tremendous steps forward as it relates to this item, which I know means a lot to you. I am from South Carolina, a relatively rural state. It means a lot to me. I didn't, some of the things I experienced, I didn't realize that there were issues with call, completion. Sometimes you just accept things as, oh, the call didn't go through, or that, and so all of this to me has been a very useful engagement to target and see where those issues and disconnects literally lie, and the reinforcement of why it's so important. We're talking about the economic viability of communities. If something like this is in question, we're talking about public safety vulnerabilities if we do not address these particular issues. So the FCC, as you mentioned, did clearly explain to carriers that they have certain responsibilities. That, of course, was assumed by us all, but it was not laid out in print. So that is the rule of the road that has been affirmed and enumerated, that there are responsibilities of the carrier, regardless of who they, whether it's a direct engagement or first, second, or third party in engagement. We have also, as you know, issued a notice for proposed rulemaking, seeking comment on the data collection process. And it compares, it looks at the numbers in terms of completions of rural versus urban. And it is going to label, it is assumed certain variables that you cannot go outside of, that it would be unacceptable, I should say, to go outside of. And you probably heard of a consent decree that was issued recently by with a particular provider. And that's significant on more than one front. Yes, it's significant because there is an economic penalty, realized, but it's also important because it's helping us to make up a process where we can extract critical data that will help our enforcement bureau in ongoing investigations. So this particular, the consent decree not only sent out a powerful message that certain practices will not be tolerated, it is giving us the template to go forward in order for us to be better evaluators of other providers. So it is an incredible reinforcement to what I know we all want, quality service for all of our citizens, regardless of where they live.
So thank you, Commissioner. In the spirit of hoping that we can get a couple of questions from our audience here, I just wanted to ask another question. When I look out at the carriers in this room, they're broadband providers, they're communication providers, but they're also, a lot of them do wireless, a lot of them do video, in part because they are kind of the one-stop shop for their communities and their consumers. So I have kind of a loaded question, which is regarding their other lines of business. At the Senate Commerce Committee hearing last week, it was very obvious that spectrum was a very big issue. Spectrum is hot, everybody wants to talk about it, what are we gonna do? We've got folks that have spectrum, they're not quite sure what to do with it. We've got a lot of issues with interoperability, access to handsets, affordable roaming, and it was very clear, so I wanted to ask you, it's gonna be about wireless and about video, but on the wireless front, clearly there's gonna be more spectrum auctions. One of the things that really struck me is spectrum auctions were really effective years ago when there were smaller licensing areas. We've now kind of got a duopoly between Verizon and AT&T because frankly they can go in and they can buy up these large swaths of spectrum. But what's happening is they can build out to their requirement and their rural areas still don't get service. So I guess I'm kind of curious, and then I always have to put in a plug that frankly, with all this cool broadband stuff, you can't do it without a wired network. So even when people talk about everything's moving to a wireless world, wireless still needs wires. But I'm kind of curious your perspective on where you see some of these wireless issues playing out. And frankly, if you see a potential role for small carriers to be able to provide wireless in their service territory. So that's my wireless side of the question, if you had any thoughts on that.
Well, one of the things you made me think of is what the notice of some of the things that we had in my office made sure that was in the notice that addressed at least what for me was one of the key concerns that you brought forth. That to ensure that we have a competitive, a robust engagement as it relates to the proceeding. And so if you note in one particular section, we asked questions about whether or not there should be a mixture in terms of a framework. I'm always, and what I mean by that is I just kind of put forth by what has encouraged me to be more forceful in this space. There are other nations that are doing a mixture of things as it relates to their auction engagement. Meaning they have carve-outs, so to speak, where smaller businesses exclusively can engage. Now, I'm not trying to predict what will happen in terms of the auction engagement. I can affirm to you that when it relates to smaller businesses, diverse businesses, and the like, we did put questions forth about how can we ensure that there is a robust engagement to address the issue that I think is the most important issue that you put forth. Because when I talked about competition and the like, it's best served when you have a diverse mixture of size and scope of companies and businesses in order to get that diverse mixture of service opportunities for the consumer. So we put forth that, and I'm assuming that those of your members who are interested put comments forth as it relates to that, because it is important that we design and structure a platform that best serves all of our needs, from the largest communities and services to the small, the more rural. So in order for us to get the type of mixture that will produce the type of opportunities for all of us, we have to engage in the process that's laid forth in terms of the notice of proposed rulemaking and put forth legally sustainable options for us to consider.
Excellent. So that really feeds right into, you were singing my song with looking at different markets have different needs. So I would then turn into the video question. Obviously, access to programming that is affordable, affordable content is really difficult for small video providers, and that includes obviously a lot of rural telecommunication providers. And since the expiration of the ban on cable exclusivity last year, there's been a lot of talk about creating different ways to level that playing field, and so that these smaller players can bring these needed services to their consumers, or can continue to provide programming. And frankly, there isn't a meeting I go to where I don't ask my folks, who's making money on your video product, and I seldom see a hand go up in that room, but yet we all know it's a really important part of that package. People, need access to that. People want access to video. You don't see the cable providers going out into a lot of these extremely rural areas. They like to serve the donut, the whole of density. So I guess I'm curious, what you think is the status of discussion in terms of leveling that playing field in kind of the video cable world.
Well, you bring forth that is near and dear to me personally. For 14 years, was a small entrepreneur trying to struggle in a big pond. So I have particular sensitivities to those smaller, less dominant players who are determined to continue to serve their consumers in areas where, some areas where the big boys just have had traditionally no interest to operate. And I also recognize that as one of my majors was economics, that there are some core challenges as relates to the basic principle of economies of scale. So when you've got a scale and scope problem that of course puts an upward pressure on price, I don't have to tell you that the most basic of economic students would grasp that. But what we've done at the commission that I hope at least would be some comfort to those who might have challenges or who might feel that there is continues to be an unfair playing field, is that in October of last year, we made certain conclusions and allowed the exclusivity prohibition to expire, but we also issued a further notice seeking comment on whether to adopt certain rebuttable presumptions that would make the case-by-case process for smaller providers easier. So I'm hoping that you will agree that that will, if there are challenges that a company feels that they to bring to our attention, if there are issues that need to be addressed at this venue, that they indeed have an easier, less expensive, less onerous pathway to do so, and we will look at things on a case-by-case basis. And my door is always open, regardless of where we are in the process. If there are systemic issues that we want to continue to bring to our attention, again, I have particular sensitivity in this area, and assure you that my door is always open, regardless of the status of any docket or proceeding.
Wonderful. Commissioner, I know we're running a little short on time. Would you have time for maybe 1 or 2 questions from the audience real quick?
And I will do my best to hear them. Hopefully, yes, we can allow that. My door hasn't opened again to let me know I have to go to the next one, so I think we have a little bit of time.
Jackie and Lindsay from our staff are here. If you have a question for the Commissioner, please raise your hand so they can get a mic to you. That's the only way the Commissioner will hear it. Does anybody have any questions? And there's some really big white lights on us, so I can't see. Doesn't look like there are any questions.
Well, while we're doing that, I'm not hearing anything yet. One of the things that we kind of, sort of mentioned is the Technology Transition Task Force that we launched in December. Again, we continually talk about all of us being in a state of transition. And so I bring that up, to affirm that the agency is staying on top of these issues. But transition is just that. I don't know, and we don't know, and cannot predict how long the transition will take. This is robust and a quick transition to IP. All transitions take time. And at the end of the day, regardless of what we're talking about, the platform, or the like, there are some core principles that are non-negotiable as it relates to this ecosystem and this agency. Consumer protection. Protection for those, particularly those with vulnerabilities, meaning those in a disability community. Competition, is key. All of those things to allow a robust and a cornucopia of goods and services. All of those things remain important, including public safety engagement. So while we may be in a state of transition in various states of uncertainty, there are certain principles that will remain firm that I know we will agree that will benefit your business, your bottom line, and benefit me as a regulator and benefit the public as a whole. Certain things that are non-negotiable, even through the most robust of transitions.
Commissioner, I want to thank you for your time today, and thank you for joining us via the web. Thank you.
To Shirley for joining us here this morning in Minnesota. We appreciate all your insights, Shirley. You're a great leader in our industry. The convention continues. The exhibits will open at 9:30. We've got a lot of great breakout sessions this afternoon, so stick around and enjoy the remainder of the convention. Thanks, everybody, for coming this morning.